This episode is brought to you by Spira Capital. Founded by 2008 Ron Brown scholar Ethan Monreal Jackson, Spira Capital is your fractional C-suite. Whether you're a startup or a venture firm, a freelancer, or a family office, Spira Capital gives you the scale, support, and stability to grow. Stop worrying about stuff like bookkeeping, accounting, FP&A, operations, HR, payroll and benefits, or your international workforce. Let Spira Capital run those for you so you can run your business. To learn more, visit spiracapital.co. That's C-O. Welcome to The Value of One, The Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program. Since 1996, this organization has been investing in the next generation of African American leaders. And this podcast highlights the stories of the people that make this program special. I'm your host, Ray Pryor, 2015 Ron Brown Scholar. And in this season, presented by the Ron Brown Venture Lab, we're highlighting founders in our alumni network who are changing the world through innovation and entrepreneurship. We'll dive into their personal upbringings and backgrounds, the origins of their ideas, and the successes and challenges they've had along the way. Today, I'm excited to share my conversation with Emmanuel Udotong, 2015 Ron Brown captain and the co-founder and CEO of Shield. I know it's a busy season for you, man, so I really do thank you and appreciate you making the time to do this. Let's have you start with telling us a little bit about what Shield does and how long you've been working on it.
So Shield is a neobank. We work with export businesses and provide them with a faster banking and payments experience compared to what traditional banks can give them. I've been working on this for about 3 years. We originally started off as a blockchain security company, and we spent a lot of time building security solutions, trying to figure out, what was the biggest opportunity that we could find within the security landscape. After a while, I'd say like 1.5 years or so, we decided that there was a much bigger and more exciting opportunity within the payments and the banking space, and specifically for businesses that were very averse to engaging with crypto. I think a lot of people, when they think about crypto, they think about the everyday trader who's buying Bitcoin and waiting for the price to go up. But if you think about a very traditional business that's been doing the same thing for 20 years, and maybe the dad passed the business down to the son and the grandfather passed it down to the dad, trying to introduce this new form of technology that has a lot of stigmas against it. And we've all heard about the FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, big scam story and all these types of things. So when you say you should start using this new type of currency and replace all the stuff that you've been doing with this new technology, it is not trivial at all to these types of people. And in a lot of cases, they would rather just keep doing things in the safe way that they know works, rather than take a gamble, even if there's a chance that gamble might lead to more profit for them. So as a team, our team, yes, we've spent a lot of time in the crypto space, but we don't see ourselves as the typical degens who are head down in crypto and can't really see what's going on outside. We find ourselves playing in that middle, let's call it Web 2.5. We can be a bridge between this new form of technology that can unlock a lot of really exciting value for people and for businesses, and then those businesses that are, very averse and don't quite understand the technology. We can be that intermediary that brings those two things together.
In order to be a bridge, you've got to have a good product, but it's also a lot about trust. Like you said, a lot of it is not necessarily about the pitch, but also about precedent and habit and wariness about new things, particularly if the old things might have been working just fine. So I know we'll jump into that more, and you've got a lot of interesting things to say there. So tell me a bit more about how you met your team and what originally piqued your interest before even making the pivot to payments and banking. What were y'all thinking about or doing at the time when the earlier version of Shield started?
So the interesting thing about the team at Shield is we've known each other for basically all of our lives. One of my co-founders is my brother. He's 1 year older than me. He was there when I was born. So literally we've been best friends since birth. And then my other co-founder is my best friend who I met before college, actually in high school. And we went to college together. We were roommates during college at Princeton. And we've been best friends ever since. So 10 years plus for him. And then I'm 27. So, 27 years being best friends with my brother. So we've been super close way before we started this company. We've done projects together in the past. Me and my brother, we've run another company together in the past. We enjoy working together. So even before we decided, or even like before the name Shield was even a thing, I'm working at McKinsey doing consulting. My best friend, he was working at Facebook on the product team. And then my brother was also working on another project in Nigeria. The three of us all had interest in coming into the crypto space one way or another. And it was kind of NFT Bull Run 2021 that we all started to lean in and say, is there something that we can do to take advantage of this opportunity and not to let this pass by? So we started meeting and experimenting together. It started off as a little side project while we were still doing our other jobs. But eventually, the side project ended up being pretty successful. We launched like an NFT collection that did pretty well. So we felt that that was the right opportunity for all of us to quit our jobs and go full time into the crypto space. So that was early 2022. We had some momentum because we had this community that was behind us that was supporting the NFT collection. And then we also had some resources to kind of play around with and to experiment with and to try new ideas with. A lot of new people were coming into the space trying to make money on NFTs. A lot of people were getting scammed at the time. And we used to host these like Twitter spaces where, you know, we would just like give people basic advice on like how to avoid common scams, how to not get like phished and lose all your money and get your wallet drained. So that turned into the early iteration of Shield because it was like, okay, yeah, a lot of people want security. It is clearly a big need in the market. Why don't we try to build some products around this? First and foremost, for the people within our community that are supporting our NFT collection, but then to the wider space at large. So that's where the initial security idea came from. And we even were able to raise a pre-seed round building on the Shield Security Foundation. But it was after we got that raise done and we started to kind of accelerate more and hold ourselves more accountable to, is this actually making real revenue? Are people sharing this product with their friends in an organic way? And we weren't seeing that. People were telling us that like, oh yeah, this is good. Yeah, I like what you're doing. Even investors were throwing money at us, telling us like, oh yeah, like this is great. You guys have a great vision. But the only thing that is actually important for a startup is, are people willing to pay for your product? And do people really love your product to the point where if you took it away from them, they would be demanding, hey, no, give this back to me. And neither of those things were the case. Like no one was paying for our product. And at the point when we decided we're going to sunset all of these security things that we've built, there were a few people that were like, hey, what happened? The product that I was using is gone now. But for the most part, no one like, you know, called me and started yelling at me angrily and telling me, give me this product back. It's not here anymore. So, you know, I think the pivot was the right one. And we can talk more about like kind of what led us into the payments market and specifically the focus on exporters.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough reality to accept when you built a nice to have versus a need to have. But I think getting that clarity, it sounds like, is what fueled you. I can see you accepting where the security product that you built may not reach the full potential that you originally had. What door opened up into, because you opened up a lot of doors. You opened up payments, you opened up, not just to be a payment company, but also not to be a neobank. And then you opened up exporters and cross-border trade. There's a lot of different pieces there. What led to all the different lanes that you're spending your time in now?
So I think it took us a while to decide that we can't restrict ourselves to just security. First of all, there's a lot of things that you can do in security, and we tried a lot of different things. We built like 10 different products. But we had this idea that like, oh, okay, our brand is Shield. And so it's so aligned with security. And all of the articles that came out as part of our fundraising announcement are all based on security. And our investors all expect us to be a security company. So even the thought about considering something else was so hard for us to get around to. But what's worse? Our company dies as a security company and we just hold true to that initial vision and we die, or we completely drop the security framing. We do something completely different. We piss off some of our investors, but in the end, we end up making money and our company succeeds, and then we make our investors money too, right? Like, which one would you rather choose? And the answer is obvious. So we decided, okay, let's take a step back and be willing to explore different areas. Let's open our minds to opportunities that we've probably completely passed over because we didn't even think that we could explore them. As a founder, it's important at times to let the market speak to you as opposed to thinking that your brain is going to just come up with the magic solution. What is the market actually saying? And so we started thinking about what is actually making money in crypto? Where is the volume going? Exchanges are getting a lot of volume. That is like a clear reality. Obviously, we're not trying to compete against and try to build the next Coinbase. I think Coinbase is a great product. I don't know that we need another Coinbase. But paying attention to that, my co-founder, who had done a side gig at one point where he was importing electronic devices into Ecuador, which is his home country, and he had suppliers that were sending him the devices. One of his suppliers actually reached out to us and told us, hey guys, I have a client that wants to pay me using crypto. I don't want to touch the crypto. I just want to get a wire in my bank account. What do I do? At the time, we didn't even think that this is what we're going to pivot into, but we said, okay, someone's coming up to us with a problem. It is a real business that is making real money, and we're in a position to help them. We didn't actually have the infrastructure to process payments in a fully automated product enabled way, but we did have partners that we knew that could facilitate it for us. So we kind of looped in a partner. We basically helped this exporter to accept a crypto payment from his customer. And we made sure that he got a wire in his bank account the same day because that was the most important thing to him. We charged him a small fee to process that transaction. And that first payment was around, which even that was the most money that had ever gone through our account at one time. Over the next 2 months, he continued to transact with us, and he ended up doing around $100,000 over a 2 to 3 month period. And that blew our minds. Today, if we'll do $300,000 in a day, but back then it was like, whoa, this is big. There is no way that we can move away from this opportunity. We must find other businesses just like this one. And if we can find a couple other businesses like this one, then we know that like we're on to something special. That was 2-3 months of focusing on that. We still didn't know whether or not this was going to be the new focus of Shield. But we said, okay, we're going to follow the volume. This guy's saying he has a problem, and there's evidence of a problem because he's paying us for it, and the volume continues to come. So we started following him to different events that he goes to meet other businesses in his industry. These are like trade shows, import-export conferences and expos. And little do you know, we started to find other companies that said that they had the same exact problem as the first guy. It's important to mention that it wasn't easy to close these other customers. The first customer closed because he already knew us and there was already that existing trust relationship in place. When we started kind of cold approaching other businesses in the industry, people looked at us and they were like, are you guys drug dealers? Like, who are you? Like, what are you trying to sell me? Like we had people tell us like, quote unquote, I will never, ever accept crypto ever in my business. The first experience of go to market was actually like, it almost made us turn around and say like, all right, you know what? This wasn't the right market. Let's continue looking. But we just decided to take a bet because we said, all right, it's fair for them to think that like, are you guys scammers? Are you guys drug dealers? Again, like crypto has a bad reputation among more traditional crowds. And that doesn't mean that like, we should move the other way. In a lot of senses, that means that there's an opportunity because it means that there's a high barrier to entry. And if we can figure this out, then there's defensibility because it's going to be really hard for other people to figure out. So we kept leaning into it. We got some licensing to establish some credibility to actually be able to process these payments ourselves. We stood up a web platform, cleaned up our website framing, started wearing suits to the event instead of just looking like little crypto bros and startup guys. You're going to a real business conference with, people that are average age in their 40s or up. You need to like the part and get your business cards, do all these different things, these traditional business practices. It probably took around maybe 4 months from the point that we closed that first customer before we closed our second. But once we closed our second, flywheel started to really turn because then referrals started becoming more relevant because we could tell them that like, okay, we already work with 2 other businesses in your industry. And if you want, you can talk to them and they'll tell you about like how good their experience has been with us. So today, I think we have 25 to 30 of these like specific types of businesses. And like I said, we went from doing 100K taking us 3 months. Now we'll do 300K in a day. And it's been less than a year since we started in this. So the growth has been pretty quick.
Yeah. That's certainly impressive. Before I circle back to other things that are certainly going to impact your success, walk me through what does payments for exporters look like without Shield right now? Like maybe even taking crypto out of it. It sounds like if somebody did want to accept crypto, they don't have a solution or an easy way to do that. What are some of the major frictions in this process as it exists pre-Shield that Shield makes really easy and simple for your customers?
So let's start with just regular cross-border payments. Typically, as an export business, you're using your bank to do your cross-border payments. You're using the SWIFT network. The issue with SWIFT, if you're sending a SWIFT payment from the US to another country, it's not going to be super expensive. Usually it's just a flat fee. But if you have to convert from USD to another currency, then you're going to face currency exchange fees, which depending on your bank may or may not be super favorable. I'd say maybe the bigger issue that is more common if you're sending a SWIFT transfer from the US is the amount of time that it takes for the payment to land. So like SWIFT might take like 2 to 3 days, in some cases even more than that, for that money to actually get to the recipient. And you might think that like, oh, okay, well, a few days for, 100K payment, it's not that big of a deal. But we're talking about businesses that thrive on high volume movement of money and goods. These are businesses that don't make a ton of profit on each individual order. And so the best way that they can generate a lot of profit in a given month or a given year is how many orders can they get done in a given week or in a given day, right? And so if they have 100K that's just tied up in the Swift network, they don't exactly know when that's going to hit their supplier's account. They can't use that money for another order. They have to wait until that money hits their supplier's account, and then the supplier has to initiate the shipping order to them, and then they have to sell that supply, and then they get that money back and they can reuse it. Right? That is a lot of just elapsed time. Whereas they would prefer to just be able to transfer that money instantly to the supplier, have the order get instantly initiated, and then be able to sell and get the returns on that investment as soon as possible, and then reinvest that money into the next order. So the time constraint is a big one. And obviously, working with a company like us that is leveraging stablecoins in the back end to kind of like get around a lot of those Swift payment network delays gives them a huge advantage to be able to continue increasing the throughput of their transactions on a daily or weekly or monthly basis. The other quick challenge that I would mention is a cost challenge, right? So we just talked about the speed and the time challenge. There's also a cost challenge. And you typically see this less often when it's a US company sending a payment, but more often when it's a US company receiving a payment from an international business. So let's say that we have a business in Mexico, and this is actually like the exact case that I explained with the supplier or with our first client that needed help accepting a payment from a customer, right? He had a customer in Mexico that wanted to pay him. If that customer in Mexico chose to use his bank and the Swift network, not only would they be subject to that, like, 2 to 3 day time delay, but also a lot of times in Latin America, you'll find that the banks will charge very significant currency exchange fees and sometimes capital flight fees. So just because you are moving money away from that country, they're charging you a tax to make sure that you don't move too much money away from their country, right? It makes sense from the bank and the government standpoint, but again, for a low margin business that's not making a ton of profit on a given order, those taxes and fees will ruin the deal, and so the deal just won't happen. So what you find is that the businesses in Latin America who are trying to pay for the supply from the US companies, crypto is a cheaper way for me to transact compared to doing it through my bank. So I want to pay you in crypto, and I can only pay you in crypto. If you don't want to receive crypto, then we can't even do business together. Right. So that's where like a company like Shield that can come in and help them to accept that crypto payment. But at the end of the day, the US company is just getting a wire, and they're getting paid exactly how they're used to getting paid, but now they have access to these people that only want to pay them using crypto. It's a huge unlock for them from a revenue standpoint.
I appreciate you painting a picture of one, just the nature of these businesses, how important efficiency and the speed of liquidity is, but also a lot of these bottlenecks and hurdles that, like you said, it's not just that a deal gets expensive, but at certain cost points, it just doesn't happen, or it doesn't, certain networks of relationships that could be great on the business and don't even come to fruition. because of things that shouldn't stand in the way of business. I'm sure you would say, and she'll paving the way for those relationships to happen. Um,
If you think from a macro perspective, what we're doing is enabling global trade, because it's what you just said. In a lot of these cases, it's not just, oh yeah, I'm trying to just optimize, I'm trying to make a little bit more money. No, this deal is not going to happen. If the LatAm business cannot buy from the US companies that they want to buy from, what are they going to do? They have to find other solutions. Maybe they have to go look into other markets and try to buy from places where they're not as familiar. And now they have to start like figuring, like getting contacts that can go and check the supply in a place like Europe to make sure that like the supply is the right quality. And at the end of the day, it will make these products more expensive to the end consumer. That is the impact, right? If the business, if the retailer, if the wholesaler has to spend more, or it's more complex for them to get those products in, then that eventually gets passed down to the consumer. So like, even beyond just the direct clients that we're working with and like the, let's say the optimizations that we're making for them, we do tend to really see this as like something that is enabling global trade and actually serving the end consumer, and getting them more affordable products, closer to them and more accessible to them at the end of the day.
yeah, absolutely. What you just described and what you're doing was always a big deal. And now, with tariffs being all that anyone's talking about, it's become even more top of mind than before. I can only imagine how, recent developments have been impacting you and how you think about your company and your customers. What have you seen over the last however long, maybe some weeks, months, or that that tariffs has been very top of mind, at least from, United States and its relationship with other countries?
So the tariff thing is a mess, as we all know. It is confusing, is multifaceted, has a lot of different parts. There are exceptions, and then we hear that there are no exceptions. Trump says something, his administration says something else, the State Department says something else, right? So I think the biggest issue with the tariff situation right now is just the lack of clarity. If there will definitely be a X% tariff in X country on X goods, um, initiated at X time, right? If all that information is just very clearly laid out, then at least our customers, these businesses, can start to plan and they can start to adapt to what's going on, right? Like if they know that smartphones from China are going to be priced 300% higher due to the tariffs, the answer for them is, okay, well, we can't source from China anymore. Let's go source from Dubai and Europe and even like US in some cases. It's not clear. So I think that's the bigger issue. It's not necessarily the fact that they're doing tariffs. I think these businesses have been around for 20 years plus in a lot of cases. These guys have been through a lot of, changes in macro markets. They've been through changes in their own teams and the regulations within their industry, and they've been able to adapt and survive. So I think these are very like anti-fragile businesses in a lot of ways. But if you don't even really know what to prepare for, it just makes things very difficult. So that's the broader situation. But what we're seeing in more of like the individual cases, we're seeing companies preparing to source from other suppliers. China, Hong Kong. Those are definitely regions where a lot of the electronic devices have been coming from. So people are now looking at like, okay, well, I do have suppliers in Dubai as well. Let me just make sure that like those relationships are in a good place. And if I need to completely pivot where I source my supply, I'm ready to do that. The other thing that we're seeing is people are looking for cheaper ways to transact, a la stablecoins. So like the same businesses that may have previously said, I will never accept crypto in my business ever, right? When faced with an existential crisis like tariffs, any of those things that you said before go out the window, and you have to figure out how to make your margins work. So now, like maybe before they were okay, or it was enough for them to just use the traditional banking networks and settle for those costs. Now they're looking at like, okay, is there anywhere that I can squeeze out more margins? And so the proposition of stablecoin based transactions becomes a lot more attractive to these types of businesses. So, I'll summarize to say that there's both, headwinds that are making things more challenging, making things more tricky and confusing, but there's also positive tailwinds that are coming from this tariff situation in terms of the necessity to solve the pricing problems of moving money around cross-border.
I could see it both being stressful and confusing, but also a big opportunity that there are folks who are exploring new relationships and new means to do business. And without a partner like Shield, just have even less options actually with the tariffs. But you might be one of the few places they actually might get more options than what they currently have. I admire a lot about what y'all are doing and how you've approached it. The other thing I've also thought was fascinating that you're not based in all of these huge financial centers across the country or across the world of New York, and you guys aren't wearing suit and ties every day. Tell us about your office and where you're based and why and the intentionality of choosing where you want to build your company. And I can just imagine it lends itself well to the trust and credibility and the reputation that you're trying to build with your ideal customer.
So we're based in Miami as a company, and yes, while I love the weather and 24/7 sun and all of that, it's all good and everything. We're really here because our clients are here. So we work with a lot of businesses that export from the US to Latin America. And Miami, of course, just given the proximity, is the number one place in the world for trade to Latin America. Miami is the number one place. So quite literally, we set up an office here in Miami in the industrial district where you have a lot of trade companies and export companies. And some of our biggest customers are literally a few doors down from us in our office complex. So it has been a very strategic ploy for us to position ourselves as closely to our clients as possible, because again, like, they do business based off of trust and they want to meet you. They want to shake your hand. They want to come to your office and be there in person when they do their first transaction. So I think most companies that are in our space, they're not necessarily doing the same thing. Maybe the clients that they're working with don't necessarily require that, and they're very comfortable with like a fully digital experience. But for our clients, we saw very, very quickly that the best way that we can establish trust and quicken the process to actually like onboarding a customer and getting them to their first display of value from Shield is to get us as close as possible to that customer. So that's been really awesome. We'll be in the office. One of my co-founders will be there every day. I'll go a couple times per week. We'll take our meetings with our clients at the office. And yeah, I mean, you said, we're not necessarily in suit and ties every day. Try to keep a comfortable mix between, formal, maybe one button down, and then, end of the day might let go of one button and be a little bit more Miami vibes. And so yeah, we take the rolls and the punches.
Yeah, that's cool. I think striking that balance is hard to do, but it sounds like y'all are doing it well. Two more questions before I let you go. First is, this is very clearly a huge market industry, the businesses that you're trying to support. And it's clear that they're very durable. Like you said, they've been around for a while. No reason to think that en masse that they will significantly go anywhere or that they won't do whatever they need to do to stay relevant. Why hasn't anybody else really built financial infrastructure around their needs? You're talking about all these fees, taxes. You've got this long delay. It seems like nothing was set up for these businesses that can be low margin, need to do a lot of volume, and everything you're describing that Shield does for them seems obvious. Seems like this is a customer that should be served well and should have options to do so. Why do you think there's so much room to grow in trade overall as it relates to, could be just crypto, it could just be simple just payments, it sounds like also. Why is there so much white space for you guys to work in?
I think there's something unique about these like trade businesses that makes it very difficult for a lot of people to build for them. Two things. So number one is these are what we call offline businesses. These are businesses that sell physical goods. Most fintech companies like Stripe and a large wave of companies that have followed in Stripe's footsteps, they are focused mainly on online businesses that are selling online digital services like development shops, design agencies, marketing agencies, legal firms, like things like that, right? Like when you talk about physical goods, there's a lot more complexities involved where there's a shipping component to it. And you have to verify that if this person says that he is selling 100 iPhones, there were actually 100 iPhones that were put into the shipping container. You also do see a lot of money laundering that happens in the global trade industry. And so a lot of companies have just kind of shied away from that and said, hey, well, compliance is too difficult, too complex. We don't even want to try to deal with that. Let's just focus on the businesses that are much easier to find. These businesses that thrive on digital experiences, it's a lot easier to find them with online marketing. Like Stripe doesn't have an office where you can walk in as a customer and onboard to Stripe. They don't need to do that because they're working with online businesses. And I mean, arguably, you could say that that is a more cost-effective way to go to market. So that's a big component of it. It is the offline versus online nature of it. It is just like very hard to even find these offline companies. If I say the name of any one of our clients, no one will have ever heard of them. Right. So that's number one. And then I'd say number two, it's the size of these businesses. They find themselves in this missing middle category. A lot of people focus on consumers, right? Like you have these B2C companies, they thrive on having a very large amount of users, and consumers are a lot easier to convert compared to a business because consumers are a lot more likely to try new things. They're more risk tolerant, right? Like, so you have a lot of companies that focus on consumers. And then you have a lot of companies that focus on the biggest businesses, the institutional players, like the Teslas of the world and the Starlinks and things like that, who are moving like billions of dollars in a given month. And you can make a ton of value for every single enterprise customer that you close. But then there's this middle category, middle market businesses, SMEs, right? That are in a weird middle ground where they're not risk tolerant like the consumers. They're not very quick to onboard. And then they're also not bringing the same amount of, one customer brings a huge amount of value compared to the large enterprise businesses. So it becomes like a prioritization thing. A lot of people are just not willing to take on the challenge of this huge middle market segment. There are millions of companies in this middle market area. It's not that the size isn't big enough, but it is just that like the approaches that people have tried and the approaches that have worked, led by companies like Stripe and other fintech companies, haven't necessarily been that focused on middle market companies. That being said, I think there are a lot of fintech companies that have focused in this category as well. You just have to dig a little bit harder for them. They're not as sexy, but to be clear, they're making money and they're doing their thing. So that's the mold that we're following off of. And we actually think that one approach is just trying to be the next Stripe. Stripe has already become Stripe, right? You can go the other way. There's companies that have gone the other way. We're actually trying to carve out a new category. And I mean, if we can prove that, hey, like it is possible to build a huge business and provide a huge amount of value to this middle market segment, this will be an entire wave that a ton of other fintech companies will also begin to chase after as well in the near future.
Yeah, it reminds me of a handful of conversations I've had with some other founders in the venture lab about, needing to take bits and pieces of how you would approach enterprise customers and on the other spectrum, how you approach consumer. But being in this middle market means there is no clear framework necessarily for what you need to do. And sometimes it's not that the economics don't work, it takes a lot more effort than most people are willing to. Most people aren't willing to choose to put their office right next to their clients or choose to go to a place like Miami to start a bank. And but I think that's fantastic. And this last question I have for you is one I've been asking all the founders that I'm talking to in this series. It's certainly applicable for you. You, as well as your brother and your co-founder, guys have known each other for a long time. Super smart guys who are very driven and dedicated. You have built other things in the past. You likely could work on and do, whether it's entrepreneurial or not, whatever you wanted to do. Why this? Of all the things you could do with your time and your talents, what is it about what you're doing that makes you get up every day and say, this is exactly what I should be doing, versus a plethora of other options that smart, talented guys like you guys could be doing instead?
We've always been focused on being outliers from a very early age. I think that's come from our parents. So me and my brother, we were born in the US, but our parents came from Nigeria as immigrants. In the case of Lewis, our other co-founder, he was actually born in Ecuador and he immigrated over to the US at a young and early age. So we've always been outliers in a sense. Our classmates, we've related to our classmates, but there was always a little bit of like a difference. We were brought up in a different way. Our parents sent us through different programs. When I would have friends come and visit me at home, and my parents would literally force my friends to do the workbooks. They'd be like, you guys have to complete 5-10 pages of this workbook before you can continue playing. So we've always been comfortable with being off a little bit off the beaten path. And I think that that has engendered into us like a desire to want to be great and want to do far, far more than what we can do through conventional methods. So, yeah, we could be working at the McKinseys and the Facebooks of the world and do that for the next 10 years. And there's a place for that for sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we want to make our own path and do something that actually hasn't been done by anyone else, where we can say and point back and show our parents and, like our family and say, a lot of people told us that this wasn't possible, And look what we did. We made something out of nothing, and we got to the top of our field and even created a new field and got to the top of that. Like, that is the way that we think as a team. And so I think finding ourselves within this space of like global trade, where we're now dealing with companies that are trading between US and LATAM and Africa and all this different stuff, it is in some interesting ways starting to kind of connect back to the original story of like where we came from and the fact that we immigrated to where we are. I don't think it is a coincidence that we're now finding ourselves working in an industry that is moving goods back and forth and actually working with a ton of immigrants ourselves. It tends to be immigrants that get involved into global trade. So yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's all part of the story.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Value of One, the Power of All, a podcast created by the Ron Brown Scholar Program, presented by the Ron Brown Venture Lab, and sponsored by Spira Capital. If you want to hear more inspiring conversations like this one, don't forget to click subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And to learn more about the organization, check us out at ronbrown.org.